Stephen R. Covey said that mental creation always precedes physical creation. Whatever your thoughts are, that's what you're ultimately creating in your life. And so ultimately, in order to create whatever life you want, you have to start by mentally creating it. You have to create it in your mind. You have to create it with your imagination. As Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. You have to actually clarify your vision, your goals, and your ideals in your mind, turn it into goals, and then you've got to go through a process of creating it. And so in this video, I'm actually going to break down both steps, mental creation and physical creation. It's not going to be a long video. It's actually very simple, but I've never actually seen before someone break down both the steps of mental creation and then the steps of physical creation. So let me go ahead and share my screen because I've got a simple kind of sketch of what it looks like. So there's 3 steps of mental creation and there's 3 steps of physical creation. So the first step of mental creation is imagining the outcome you want. You have to first start with what you want to have. So that could be $1 million. It could be that you wrote a book. It could be that you have a great relationship with your spouse or an amazing relationship with God. You have to first define what your future self has or what your future self possesses. So what is it you want to have? What is the outcome you want to have? According to the expectancy theory of motivation, you can only be motivated by having 3 things. First, you need a clear outcome. Second, you need a path to achieving that outcome. And then third, you need the confidence that you can actually execute on that path. So the first step is just defining the outcome. We as human beings are outcome-oriented beings. All behavior is actually outcome-driven. According to teleology, which is a philosophy, basically it says that everything exists for its end. Everything we do is to create an outcome. You watching this video is to create an outcome. You checking your phone is to create an outcome, even if that's just to check your texts. You going to the grocery store is to get an outcome, to get groceries. Everything we do is to create an outcome. And so you need to be really clear on the outcome you want. And so the first step of mental creation is what is the outcome you want to have. The second is that you need to define the process or the path to getting there. Once you've defined the outcome, you then need to ask yourself, and you might not know in the beginning, how do I get there? It's called reverse engineering. So what's interesting about the mental creation side is you actually begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say. You have to start with the outcome, and then you go backwards. You work backwards. How do I actually create that? You reverse engineer the process. Sometimes you have to actually get great advice. You've got to ask people who are already there. There's a great quote, I believe it's from Darren Hardy. He said, never ask advice from someone you wouldn't switch places with. So once you've defined whatever outcome it is you want, you then need to start doing some research and clarifying and ultimately reverse engineering a path or a process. That's what you do. So you first start with have, and then you start with what do I need to do in order to get that? And so by getting that path, you might need to ask some advice, get some mentoring, get online, study, whatever it is you want to do. I remember when I first started wanting to be a professional author, I wanted to get a book deal, as an example. I wanted to get a book deal with one of the big New York publishers. That was what I wanted to have. And then once I defined what I wanted to have, I then needed to figure out, how do I actually get there? So I started calling lots of agents. I started emailing lots of authors who are already professional authors, and I started asking them, how do you become a traditionally published author? And by asking all sorts of questions and doing lots of research, I was able to define a path. That helped me have a lot of motivation. And then ultimately, I was able to study and learn how to do it. And so once you've clarified the outcome and the process of getting there, then you need to decide your identity. You need to decide, am I going to be the type of person who does that? The type of person who engages in this process and ultimately creates that outcome. So once you've identified or defined the outcome and the process, then you need to define your identity as the type of person who will actually do that process and achieve that goal. So your identity actually comes from your goal, which is really interesting because your identity is the most important aspect of your life. Your identity is how you define yourself. And most people's identity is actually based on who they are in the present or who they were in the past. There's a lot of research on this subject. For example, Dr. Daniel Gilbert, who is a Harvard psychologist, he's found that most people, they don't imagine a powerful version of their future self. Instead, most people overemphasize who they are in the present. Most people, their identity is completely based on who they are or who they were. But you actually want your identity to be based on your desired future self, on your future creation. And so your identity should actually be based on your goals. Your goals should not be based on your identity. A lot of people think that they should set goals based on who they think they are. No. Your identity is actually the way you define and describe yourself, and it should be based on your desired future self, on your desired future mental creation. So you mentally create the future first, you then define the path, and then you decide the identity of the type of person you need to be in order to walk that path and ultimately create that outcome. You ultimately define your future self based on the outcome you want. So your identity should be based on your future self. And here's what's interesting. Your identity is what shapes your behavior. So your behavior ultimately comes from your identity, and your behavior over time is what creates your personality. So if you clarify a future self and define what you want, then you can ultimately drive your identity and your personality so that you can become the type of person who has the life you want. Well, now here's how you actually do the physical creation side. So once you've actually defined your future self, and once you've started to clarify that path, now you need to ultimately go through the process of now going from where you are to where you want to go. So the first thing you do is, and one thing that's really crazy is actually the physical creation is the reverse order of the mental creation. So what you do on the mental creation is you have to start with what you want to have, and then you need to define what you need to do, and then ultimately you decide who do I need to be in order to do this. Well, the physical creation is the opposite. You have to first start with who do I need to be, and then you need to say what does that person do, and then what will that person have. So you have to start with be, then do, then have. You have to first off embody your new identity, which is your new future self, the type of person who does that. So I remember when I was first starting as an author, and I clarified, okay, I really want this 6-figure book deal with a traditional publisher. And I now know that I need to, after asking lots of questions of agents and other authors and stuff like that, I then defined a path. I needed to learn how to get email subscribers, learn how to blog, learn how to grow an audience in order to put myself in a position where I could get a book deal. So once you've clarified the path, then you need to actually see yourself as that kind of person. So the first step of physical creation is now you need to be that person. You need to embody that identity. You need to be, then do, then have. So you need to see yourself as the kind of person who has that life. You need to explain yourself as the kind of person who achieves your goals. There's a theory in psychology called the theory of narrative identity. And basically what it means is that your identity is the story you tell about yourself. So rather than telling the story about your former self or about who you are right now, you actually want to tell the story of your future self. That's part of how you embody your future self. They sometimes say act as if, but you not just want to act as if, you actually want to see yourself as your future self. You want to explain to other people who your future self is. And so you need to be your future self. You need to be before you can do, because your identity, whatever it is you do, comes from who you are. How you do anything is how you do everything. Your behavior comes from your identity. So you need to be your future self now. You need to be that kind of person. I remember when it dawned on me, I really need to just be a professional author. I need to be it before I can have it. And I need to be it before I can do it. And so I would get myself in the right mindset. I would see myself as an author. I would explain myself as an author. Even Jeff Goins. Jeff Goins was one of my initial mentors. He said that for a long time he wanted to be a writer. And you can apply this to anything. It doesn't have to just be writing. But for a long time he wanted to be a writer, but he never got around to it. And then eventually he just started calling himself a writer. And he got a website called Goins Writer after his last name. And so he started to tell people he was a writer. He started to embody the identity of a writer. And then his behavior followed his identity, which is always true. So you need to embody the identity of your future self and then behave as your future self would behave. Whatever that looks like to you. If you're wanting to grow a real estate empire, embody someone who has that real estate empire, define your outcome, and then do what that person would do. And if you're being and then doing, you're ultimately going to eventually have what you want to have. So that's really the ordering of mental creation and physical creation. You need to embody your future self, do what your future self would do, and eventually you'll have what your future self would have because you are what you repeatedly do, and eventually your future self will have what you repeatedly do. So you need to engage in the process of whatever it takes to be your future self. That's how it goes. And one key component of all of this is you've got to put the important before the urgent. So if you've mentally created a future, whatever future you want, you need to then start living towards that future here and now, even though in the moment you've got a current life, you've got current demands, current situations, you may have kids, you've got a job. So you've got a whole life that's keeping you stuck in your current self. But if you have a future self that's different and you need to be and do the things that your future self would do to have what your future self would have, you need to put the important before the urgent. That's why you've got to have like good evening and morning routines. Go to bed, imagine, visualize your future self. As Thomas Edison said, never go to bed without a request to your subconscious. You got to imagine your future self, and then you got to wake up and put the important before the urgent. Important things are not urgent. So going to the gym, for example, is not urgent. You could put it off. Paying the bills is urgent. That's why you go to work. Getting your kids to school, if you have kids, that's urgent. Getting to job, getting to work, that's urgent. But in order to actually be and do your future self, you've got to put those things first. And so you got to wake up and actually visualize, meditate on your future self, and then take action toward your future self. What they call that in the productivity world is eating the frog. You've got to eat the frog as Mark Twain said, if you've got a frog to eat, you want to eat it first thing in the morning. If you've got 2 frogs to eat, eat the bigger one first. In other words, put the important before the urgent. Put your future self before your current circumstances. Procrastinate and push off those things that are urgent, which is basically just busyness, and focus on what's right. Focus on what's going to create the results of your future self. That's ultimately how I became a professional writer. I'd wake up, I'd write articles first thing in the morning, and then I'd go to class. I was a graduate student. That was what was urgent, was going to class. But I put what was important first. I was being and doing my future self, and eventually I was able to get book deals. Now I've written multiple books, and now I am my future self. And now I'm imagining and mentally creating new futures. So that's ultimately the steps. The steps of mental creation are define what you want, then define the process, which you reverse engineer, and then decide the type of person you need to be in order to go through that process and become and to have what you want. The physical creation is the exact opposite. You've got to be, then do, then have. You've got to embody your future identity and then do what your future self would do. And if you repeatedly do what your future self would do, you're eventually going to have what your future self would have. That's the steps. Hope it helps. You can absolutely do this. This is how you achieve goals. Mental creation always precedes physical creation. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. Have an amazing day.